Welcome, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to be here hosting Apocalyptic Best Practices launch. My name is Cami Ostman. I am an author and the founder of the Narrative Project. Elizabeth Vanderweel, PhD, is principal consultant for Hand in the Dark Consulting in Seattle, Washington, and the author of the forthcoming, actually here now, book, Apocalyptic Best Practices, a unique approach to fear and change. Dr. Vanderweel has pursued her love of learning, teaching, and leadership in a variety of roles, including Associate Dean for our community college, Senior Director for Workplace Excellence for a medium-sized nonprofit, Assistant Professor for universities and colleges in multiple states and modalities, and volunteer lead for international efforts of the Earth Guardians, a community service of Burning Man. Elizabeth gained her doctorate in leadership from Gonzaga University in 2007, an experience which paralleled her alignment with the Burning Man culture of principled creativity and service. She has a deep commitment to be of service to her community, reveling in its diversity, evolution, and gaiety. Her interest in apocalypses begun with her master's thesis on apocalyptic fiction in the United States, and through her dissertation on fear and learning, continues in her work and life as mother, consultant, teacher, community member, and author, particularly in these unprecedented times. Wow. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you today, Evie. Really appreciate it.
Oh, I am so delighted that you are able to do this because our conversations were part of the inspiration for actually getting this book done.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting now that we're doing these book launches online. You know, I've done a number of them, and I think it's just really fun to have, you know, two people there to be able to talk back and forth. And what a pleasure to see this book come into being after talking about it for so long. So yeah, I'm excited. Are you ready to talk about it?
Yes, let's get to it.
Let's get to it. Great. So tell me the story of this book. How did it come into being?
Well, a little bit of foreshadowing in the introduction. It is kind of a retelling of my dissertation. I took a lot of my discoveries from talking with international leaders in the realm of education and my knowledge of leadership, along with some new research in sort of the areas of neuroscience and psychology of literally how emotions are made. That was a book that came out just a couple of years ago. And I feel like that piece particularly was an impetus for bringing this book to fruition, because it really brought home a key piece to understanding that our emotions are constructed, that usually not consciously, but the new research is showing that we come in hardwired for basically 4 feeling states and everything else we made, which thank goodness we did.
And those 4 feeling states, will you name those for us?
They are calm and excited, comfortable and uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's it.
Pretty basic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How did you get interested in fear specifically?
I, at some point, came to understand that I've lived most of my life afraid. And my decisions were being driven by avoiding that which was scaring me. And it made my world really, really small. Yeah. And to the point that I needed to almost literally break out of this little tiny world that I had created. And I adopted a mantra around the time that I started graduate school. So graduate school, Burning Man, and this mantra all kind of came together at the same time. And it was no fear, no expectations. So intuitively, I understood that fear is about the future. And if you don't have expectations, it's hard to be afraid because you're not thinking about the future. Now, remaining in that state is not sustainable, as anyone who's been around a toddler can attest. But what it did do was show me that for a lot of my experience and a lot of what I wanted to do, the biggest thing in my way was me.
Mm-hmm.
And as that awareness opened up, I started talking about and reading about other people having similar experiences that I perceived, and they were all calling it different things.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of the inspiration to start studying the kind of fear that actually brings you to life rather than shuts your life down.
Mm-hmm. So you make a distinction between the kind of fear which prevents you from engaging in life, and then that which somehow sparks a new curiosity for you or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's so in our culture, we're often assuming or encouraged to think of fear as like an on-off switch.
Mm-hmm.
Either you're afraid or you're not afraid. And fear is like so very, very old for humans that to have it still be so almost mechanistic is not really logical, honestly, if you can apply logic to emotions. What I have found through my own reflections and research is that fear is a many splendored thing, just like love, that there are degrees of intensity as well as, I call them flavors of fear. Like it's not just a matter of more fear or less fear. There are different kinds of fear, similar to like when I say I love my car and I love my daughter, that's not the same thing. That's not the same kind of love. And if I say I'm afraid of public speaking and I'm afraid of dying of COVID, those aren't the same kinds of fear.
Right.
But in most of our conversations, both personally and publicly, we don't tend to make that distinction. Mm-hmm. And so when people are in any way expressing that they're afraid, it's back to that bipolar sort of assessment of, you're afraid, therefore weak, or you're not afraid and therefore strong, when oftentimes it's absolutely the opposite that's true.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting. I know in my work as a therapist, I think people that I sit with, sometimes they don't even know the difference between those different kinds of fears that they feel in the body. Almost it's the same kind of fear. They're not slowing it down enough to really wonder about it.
Yeah, well, we're not encouraged to wonder about fear. Starhawk has a somewhat famous quote of, where there's fear, there's power, and where there's power, there's fear. So it is the powers that be, it's to their advantage that we don't examine our fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where did you get the name for the book, Apocalyptic Best Practices?
It kind of emerged as I was reflecting, like our first question today, how did you become interested in this? When did you start looking at this? And at first I thought, well, it was, this class in graduate school at Gonzaga, or it was this conversation that I had with this person as a young mom. But really it goes back to that, at least back to that master's thesis in apocalyptic fiction at the turn of the century. Mm-hmm. And as I was thinking about it, like, first of all, understanding that apocalypse is not the end of existence, that apocalypse is, in the words of REM, the end of the world as we know it. It doesn't mean that everything stops. It just means that everything that you thought was true and that worked doesn't and isn't anymore. Yeah. And that now there is a new world that you have to navigate. So once I understood that apocalypse happens almost all the time for individuals as well as societies, as well as for planets, there had to be a set of practices. There's, my first training is in literature. I'm looking for the themes. What is common through all of these stories of apocalypse, of these massive changes? And a lot of it has to do with sussing out how best to engage with fear.
Yeah. And it's almost like you knew that we were going to be having a pandemic and you scheduled your book launch during the pandemic. But I know you didn't know that was coming. And yet there is definitely this apocalyptic experience that we're having collectively right now as well. So I think your book is well timed.
Yeah, ironically enough, it's the pandemic that facilitated actually getting it done, because I haven't been working. So I had this time and I'm like, I'm going to get this done. If I don't get it done now, then it's going to die on the vine. And that's not okay, because a dear friend and a very influential person promised me a blurb to get this book out. And I'm like, I am not leaving that gift on the table.
Yeah, I know that. I have a question for you about some of the people that you interviewed a little bit later. I know you have some reading for us. Would you like to do a reading for us?
Sure.
We'd love to hear.
So from the beginning of the book, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that idea of the 4 feeling states. Fear and terror aren't actually part of our experience when we first arrive in this world. Research by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett has provided us with insight into what we fundamentally feel throughout our life and how we construct emotions from these basic feeling states. Through a process of interception, our brains experience 2 axes of feeling states: pleasant to unpleasant and calm to excited. In the center, there is a completely neutral state. That's it. That is literally, physically, neurologically all we feel. As Barrett carefully details in How Emotions Are Made, The Secret Life of the Brain, every emotion we feel is constructed by a matrix of these feeling states, language, and socialization. This happens so early and so thoroughly that we don't remember it happening at all. Thus, believing that emotions are a result of biochemistry and external experience. A long-held view by psychiatrists and neuroscientists tell us that we perceive something from our environment, external or internal. The first place it goes is our amygdala. The amygdala is a tiny powerhouse in our brain which processes and conditions our responses to fear, addictions, sex drive, search for comfort, anger, and many primary responses that in the vast majority of human experience have kept us safe from harm. It is the part of the brain that has the power to inhibit the rest of the body's systems so that we can accomplish the task at hand. It is part of our lizard brain and really important for anything that might require energy and focus. The amygdala regulates the biochemical soup that is released during a fear reaction. Based on prior conditioning, this soup can contain any combination and amount of any of the following: dopamine, which is rocket fueled, triggered by challenge. Adrenaline is mainlined espresso, triggered by defensiveness. Noradrenaline, organic steroids, triggered by aggressiveness. Testosterone, the Hulk, triggered by competition and domination. Cortisol, support staff for adrenaline and noradrenaline, triggered by anxiety, frustration, and guilt. DHEA, and I don't know what that stands for, and I probably couldn't pronounce it if I could, is happy energy juice, triggered by love. Yes, there's the chemicals in love or the chemicals in fear. Serotonin, happy relaxed juice, triggered by appreciation. Endorphin, painkiller, triggered by intensity. And oxytocin, group glue, triggered by cooperation and collaboration. I have to show these off. These illustrations by Meps Schulte. There's a little amygdala stirring soup in a brain. They're just so adorable. However, the biochemical effects of an emotion last only 90 seconds. After that, it is your conscious or conditioned choice to hold on to that emotion. While feeling fear is instinctive and necessary, our response is conditioned and shaped by language, socialization, and our choices over time. Thanks to our new understanding of neuroplasticity, whether our conditioning was conscious or not, we have the power to change our conditioning over time with conscious intent.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, this represents a lot of research on your part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, it's there's a saying in graduate school that your dissertation topic takes over your life. And some people think that's not a great thing, but for me, it's like it just keeps going. There's always more research. There's always more questions. There's always more experiences as human beings continue to evolve with our world around us. And I find it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, I really do too. I don't know if I told you this or not, Evie, but every year I choose a topic and I read a book a month on that topic. And so, like this year, I'm reading about leadership, a book a month on leadership. But a few years ago, when I was going through my divorce, not ironically, I decided to read about fear, and I actually read on fear for 2 years. I read a book a month about fear. And what I have loved about your book is that in some ways it's almost a summary of everything that I read, only more concise and more attainable. So I've really, really appreciated what
That's
you've
wonderful.
done here. Yeah, I really have. I mean, some of those books on fear that I read were, they didn't go into the biological, any of the brain functions of fear. It was more just really about the effect on the person. But here you've really covered it all, and you've given us some practices. I mean, you really have given us exercises.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if you could just say a word or two about what makes this book really distinct, both the exercises and the illustrations.
Yeah, I felt as soon as I landed with this title, I'm making a promise to the reader that these are practices. So I needed some practical elements. And I created a series of exercises that could be taken in sort of a sequential fashion, sort of, as you advance or not. I mean, you could see something and like, oh, I've already tried that, or, that just doesn't seem appealing to me at all, and skip it totally and still get some value out of a different one. And also with the illustrations, one of my dear friends pointed out early on that these are concepts that are going to be very new for people. And people take in information in lots of different ways. And one of them is through pictures. And he was actually trying to get me to make this into a graphic novel, which is way beyond my talent set. But I did engage Mep Schulte to do the illustrations. And we went back and forth quite a bit on, we've got to be able to convey these concepts without words so that people can take these in different ways. And, even if you're basically getting it with the words, I'm hoping that the illustrations just kind of support that understanding as well.
They do. I mean, I really, as I said, fear is a fascination of mine personally. And some of these illustrations, and they're sweet, they're cute, but they really do just illustrate the points that you're making. And you can read through the material and then look at the picture and, oh yeah, that I get it. So I really love the illustrations in here.
Yeah, I do too. And just as an example, I want to read the first exercise in the book just to give people a flavor for what these are like. They're not, you don't have to do jumping jacks unless you want to. It's good to get exercise when we're in lockdown.
It is good.
Okay, so this is one of the first exercises. Make a list of the first 3 fears that come to your mind. Dark alleys, destitution, poor health, loss of a loved one, loss of a job, whatever is most present for you right now. Once you have your list, start writing the story of each of these fears. What do they look like? How do they feel? Where are they from? Why do you have them? Treat your fear as if it were a character in the story of you. What is its role? Hero, villain, anti-hero, mentor, sidekick? Take your time exploring and getting to know the fears that are with you right now.
I really love that, because I do think that we have a story about each of the things that, if you're afraid of not having enough money, you have an entire history around that idea, right? That lives with you your whole life.
Yeah. Again, I'm hoping to help guide people through this sort of peeling back the layers of our conditioning and identifying what is working for us and what isn't. Just because we've been conditioned in a particular way does not mean that that conditioning is bad. Indeed, as I point out, we've evolved with fear. Like we have been selected for this because fearless people tend not to live very long.
Right. They don't know, they don't care what happens to them, or they're sociopaths. I think it is really important that we embrace fear and that we learn how to work with it and be in relationship with it. And that's what you've given us, I think, in this book, is how to have a new relationship with fear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really a proponent for accepting fear as your ally, and being able to use it rather than be used by it.
Yeah, right. It's not in the driver's seat, but it's in the car with you.
Yeah.
Right.
with a cookie in the booster seat, because often it just acts like a toddler.
Right. Totally. I know that in the process of writing this book and writing your dissertation, that you got an opportunity to interact with and interview some really fascinating people. And so I'm just wondering if you would maybe tell us about one or two of those conversations that you had and what stands out for you.
Oh, well, the first conversation stands out the most, and that was a conversation with Parker Palmer at his home in Madison, Wisconsin. When I initially reached out to him, I didn't know who he was. But I shortly found out and was kind of after the fact starstruck. So I think that set me up well for just continuing the engagement, because he responded to my initial request. And through the course of a day and a half of conversations with him in his home, being ministered by his wife for all the mosquito bites in June in Madison, we developed a friendship, which just floors me. Mm-hmm. And we've been able to continue having conversations, and I've watched as his activities and careers have evolved, and listening to his stories about like being an inspiration for a center that he didn't found, the Center for Courage and Renewal, but was inspired by his writing. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he struggled with imposter syndrome, with all the privilege that he has had throughout his life, he still was waiting for somebody to figure out that he's faking it. Well, he's not. So that really kind of set the tone for a lot of this, was coming to understand that the people that are my icons and that I admire and have accomplished such amazing things with their lives and their talents, they are also people. Yeah. And if you get them talking about something that they really care about, you're going to be engaged with them. And so that's how I approached people like Dr. Nell Noddings, who wrote the seminal work on the ethic of care, which balances the ethic of justice. She did not want to talk to me. And she said quite forcefully, I have worked my entire career to get fear out of the classroom. I don't think I have anything to share with you. And I said, but in your writings, you talk about how risky some education can be. And how can it be a risk if nobody's afraid? And she's like, maybe we do have something to talk about. And so again, I got to sit in her living room on the Jersey Shore and talk about her experiences with fear. There goes my dog.
That's
And she actually gave me one of my greatest phrases and sort of thought constructs around encouraging the kind of fear that is really beneficial for learning. And it's about creating a space that's safe enough for fear. So in that way, you are, as an instructor or facilitator, you are taking care of all of the aspects, all the things that you can control. So like things that people may be afraid of, like grades or humiliation or anything like that that could happen in a classroom. You take care of those. You make sure those don't happen. And then when people are feeling that level of safety, then the real fears come up. The real fears of, I have lived my life with this worldview for this many years, and now you're telling me that that's wrong?
Right. Yeah. I actually remember that in graduate school myself, with encountering some of the ideas about family therapy and how they challenged my current worldview at the time, and feeling like if I embraced those new ideas, it would turn my world upside down. I would have to think about my family, about my life, about pathology, about all kinds of things differently, and how that would leave me feeling unmoored, you know. And we talked a lot about that in graduate school. And I mean, ultimately really leaning into that fear and opening up my heart and my mind to new ideas, and seeing that there was a net to catch me most of the time was
Yeah,
was
not
really
all
meaningful.
of the time.
Yeah, not all the time. Changed my life. There's my dog.
Dogs are representing.
Yeah. So first of all, also I want to say that I heard when you told me way back, that you got to talk to Parker Palmer. I remember just feeling so grateful for you, but jealous too, because when I was a high school teacher, he was such an inspiration to me, giving me the sense that what I was doing was a calling, you know. So I imagine that was pretty wonderful to be able to sit with him.
Yeah, he definitely has a very he brings his whole self to every engagement.
Mm-hmm.
It's wonderfully refreshing.
Yeah, what an example for all of us to really, really show up with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another person that does that in a very different realm is Starhawk. She is a witch that leads activism. She was on the ground at the WTO confrontation in Seattle. She's been on the ground fighting for Palestine, and she is culturally Jewish. She's she's been banned from traveling to the Mid East. But yeah, I got to sit with her uh, in her ranch north of San Francisco, and amongst like helping replant the garden after the boars tore it up, and touring their latest cob structures, we got to talk about when people show up with expectations for the magical, for the transformative, and you are expected to do that, and you're just kind of having a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is that like, and how does fear show up in those sorts of situations? And her ability to move people through spaces that maybe she hasn't even gone through
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely awe-inspiring. She is a person who has just taken what is before her and done everything that she could possibly do with it. Like, it was very much one of those use every part of the buffalo kind of people. Like you have this positionality, you have this talent, you have these connections. What can you do to help people?
Wow.
To help the earth?
Wow. You know, Evie, I was just listening to you, and it strikes me that you embody something that I'm always telling the writers in the Narrative Project, which is that to write a book is a really generous effort. I mean, I know that it can be very tedious. I know it can be frustrating as you do draft after draft, and there can be a lot of self-doubt, and also even this thing that creeps in a lot of times who's going to read this? Is it really worth my time? Maybe I'm wasting my time. And I'm always saying, when we take our experiences, when we cull through our life and we take our experiences and we make the commitment to sit down and write a book and write those drafts one after the other, it is a very, very generous act for our readers. So I just want to say that I feel that you've really done that. You've taken all of these different things and given this generous gift to us.
Oh, I'm so delighted. I really feel very passionately about getting these concepts, these ideas out to people, because this is how we can make lasting change.
Yeah.
Like you said, when I started really, putting my nose to the grindstone to get that first shitty draft complete, did not understand that we were going into a year-long pandemic. But it's absolutely perfect in the timing
Yes.
of bringing this out. And, I want this to be something that people can use as we are coming out of this massive change into a world that is going to be different. That people talk about, when can we get back to normal? I'm like, there's no going back. With what is going to be normal has not even happened yet.
Right.
Normal is what happens regularly over time, and that is not going to be for a while. And until we understand and can live that, we're going to be in this sort of limbo, this really uncomfortable, scary limbo of not knowing exactly how to behave. Like I put on makeup today, so I look good on camera. And I'm like, do I remember how to do this?
Right.
Really basic stuff is going to be very different.
You do. You look great. There's nothing weird happening there. So you answered one of the questions I had, which is who is this book for? And I'm really hearing that it is for people who are needing to be in a transition or a shift or a change. And that's really all of us right now, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the whole time you're writing a book, people are always asking, who's your audience? And, all authors say everybody, but really everybody, every adult, probably little kids, they'll like the cartoons maybe.
Yeah.
But really, anyone who has experienced or will experience some kind of massive change, like even on the personal scale of a divorce or a move across country or a diagnosis that just rattles your world.
Right.
And everything that you can and cannot do on the other side of that.
Right.
How can you manage that without making yourself and your world really, really small? Because I believe this intensely, that we are all wonderful. We are all full of wonder, and we need more opportunities to be wonderful.
Would you like to give us another reading? And then as you're getting ready to do that, I would invite people who are here to type into the chat if you have a question for Evie about the book or her process. And I'll keep an eye on that chat. Make sure that you chat to everyone or specifically to me, either one. But then we can open up to questions that way.
Okay. I'm going to read a section from about the middle of the book, since we're talking about change. It's a section called Fear the Gap. Have some water first. Even our words are changing. In his book, The Power of Babel, Dr. John McWhorter wrote, everything about language is eternally and inherently changeable, not just the slang and the occasional cultural destination, but the very sound and meaning of basic words and the word order and grammar. If change is resisted or ignored, our situations only get worse. In the case of language, we lose the ability to accurately communicate our experience and thoughts. Just think for a moment, if you only had access to the words that were first written down in English in the 10th century, the very activity I'm doing now, typing on a computer into word processing software, could not be described. So why do we resist change? Why do we stay with the same relationships, companies, towns, social groups, activities, etc., when they aren't good for us, don't let us thrive, even hurt us? Fear of change. We fear change. Though in reality, we change almost every moment of every day. We change clothes, locations, what we eat, destinations, and routes we take to get there. We change our perspectives, understandings, approaches, and levels of awareness. I often say that people aren't really afraid of change. We don't resist change that much unless the change is imposed from someone or something else outside of us. It's the difference between leaving a job and being laid off, between moving because you found a better place to live and moving because you can no longer afford where you are or your home has been destroyed. Between planning for a family and one showing up unbidden, or choosing to divorce your spouse and being abandoned. The end results of these scenarios are objectively the same: no longer working at your job, moving to a different place, a larger family, or being single. Yet fear shows up differently for one than the other, thus coloring our experience and understanding of what has changed and why. We tell very different stories about change that we choose and change that is imposed upon us. But even change we choose, such as deciding to leave a job, is accompanied by some flavors of fear.
Mm-hmm. That is my experience for sure.
Yeah. Like I shared in the invitation for today, like I was nervous most of the last couple of days getting ready for this. And thanks to my research, I know that that's because this is really important. And I need to really be present and focused in what is happening right here, right now.
Right.
Fear, again, is about the future. But as anyone who has had stage fright and still walked out onto the stage, as soon as you're doing the thing that you're afraid to do, you're not afraid anymore.
Right.
Because you're now in the present. And fear can't exist in the light of the present.
Right. Well, I know that as a marathon runner, I mean, standing at every single starting line I've ever run, I've ever stood at, I feel afraid I'm not going to be able to finish. And then while I'm running, I'm just one step at a time, just like always. That's really all it ever is.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of sort of popular sayings around fear, feel the fear and do it anyway. Well, maybe not. I mean, sometimes you're afraid to do something because you could die. You maybe don't want to die or get seriously injured or repeat a pattern that is not healthy for you. Part of what I hope to communicate through this book is that what your fear helps you, your values, how you want to grow. And because you're afraid of something that other people are also afraid of does not mean that it's the same fear or that you should do the same thing with it. So I happen to be allergic to wasps. I am very scared when there are wasps around, and I start thinking, do I have my EpiPen? Other people are scared of wasps just because wasps are nasty little creatures. Sorry for any wasps fans out there. You guys are weird. But they don't have like any direct experience or like nasty consequences if they're actually stung by a wasp, but they're still afraid of them. Mm-hmm. So we're both afraid of the same thing, but that fear is very different.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We might assume that we're internalizing it the same way because it's about the same thing, but in fact, that's not the case.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have a few questions here. Evie, are you ready for them, or do you want to do one more reading before we go to questions?
Let's get to the questions. If people have questions, let's get to them.
Okay. So one question we have here is directly about the book. What is one of the practices from your book that has been especially helpful to you as you promote it? So as you're promoting the book, and you feel afraid of the promotion process, what is one of the exercises? I think that's what the question means. That's how I would interpret it.
I can tell you exactly what I did today.
Tell us.
To prepare for this, as I was noticing my anxiety increase and my little squirrel brain going over all the things that could go wrong, I started the mantra of, this is because it's really important. And it is only as important as you make it. I mean, ultimately, yes, this is my official launch. I'm delighted that everybody is here. This is an amazing opportunity. And this book's not going away. I could do this again in a few months, maybe with other humans in the same room. That would be awesome.
That would be.
And so, like changing the story of what is scaring me. So what is happening with my fear right now? I need to be very present and very focused. I can't go, la-di-da off, go play with my dog and like, oh, darn, I'm supposed to be online right now, which has happened.
Right.
But because I have this fear, because this is so important to me, that was coming up and making me stay focused, making sure that I was on time, if not early, which I do tend to do. And the story about the fear is because I want to do something really good for the people that have taken their time and their attention to be with us today to talk about this.
That's great. The next question is sort of takes us to another level. So this should be kind of fun to talk about. DEI has been shown to be the right thing from an ethical point of view, as well as economic point of view, yet getting corporations to completely embrace inclusion has been difficult, with few providing little more than lip service. What's their fear? What is the best way to overcome institutional fear? That's a huge, huge question, but I love it.
Yeah, that is really big. So DEI, for anyone that's not familiar, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is an effort to basically shake things up. And I will tell you right now, people that are successful in the current way that things are done are not going to want to change that. They will say the right words and they will look nice. And they may want genuinely to make changes that are beneficial to other people. But if we're talking about change that could potentially cause me discomfort, even not even real harm, but even just discomfort, I am going to resist that, because again, the difference between change that I choose and change that's imposed on me. So I'm thinking of like the guy, what is his last name? Dan, the CEO that made everybody in his company, their salary at least $70,000, reduced his salary to make this happen. That's a change that he chose. Mm-hmm. Whereas some of these other companies, because of societal pressures or other things, they're being forced to reckon with the disparities that are present in their organization. So one, they're afraid of the change. Mm-hmm. They're afraid of what they don't know, because what they've already been doing has been successful for them. Mm-hmm. So if you're trying to like make real changes around an organization that seems to be only paying lip service, you need to do it grassroots. Mm-hmm. Talk to the people that are in direct service part of that organization and their supervisors. Mm-hmm. Because if you're not getting real movement from the top, so to speak, and most of these are hierarchical organizations, it's just not going to happen. You're just going to be, if you're a contractor and you're being paid to do this, and you just need money, which is a real thing, do what they want and walk away with your check. And if there's a way that you can get to other people or other departments within that organization to plant those seeds, sometimes that's the best we can do. And we just have to wait for the time for those seeds to grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's frustrating. There's it seems to me like there's a fear of there not being enough, like enough power, enough goodness, enough money
Hmm.
that seems to prevent people at the top from being willing to make those changes. But there
Yeah.
is a fear there, right?
Yeah. That scarcity mindset, again, people who have been successful in a scarcity world
Mhm.
are going to really resist
Yeah.
an abundance mindset, at least, if not more than actual changes. Like, I've heard this, you're just a dreamer if you constantly think that we already have enough for everybody.
Mhm.
But scientifically, that's been shown. We do have enough for everybody. And it's an issue of distribution, not availability.
Mhm. That is such a great question, and one I'm going to guess that you're going to keep talking about as you continue to launch this book.
Yes,
Yeah.
because similar with the work that I do with my consulting, a lot of my colleagues are in this mix or being hired to do this work, and they're like very frustrated
Mhm.
because they're running up against these walls and they don't understand why are these people asking for my help to change, but when I try to do something that'll actually change things, they don't want to do it.
Right. I mean, especially when Lee points out here that it's shown to be not only the right thing, but it's economically, it would be supported economically. So, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you for that question. That's really rich.
That's the thing about fear, is it's not rational. It
Yeah.
will not respond to facts.
Right. Yes, that I have seen that in my own life many times. Vanessa wants to know, I'd love to hear more about what the quote by Star Hawk you shared means to you. Where there's fear, there's power. Where there's power, there's fear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I love that quote. And I got to talk with her more about it. And it is about, it's similar to follow the money. If you want to find out why a situation is the way it is in our capitalistic systems, follow the money. With power that are making situations happen or shoving actions in a particular way, follow the fear. So for example, what we were just talking about, if you follow the fear of what people are afraid of as you're trying to make these changes in their organization that they've asked you to do, you find out that they may have some underlying biases they're not even aware of, or they may have some that they're very aware of, but they're like having to do this performative thing. Following this fear, you find where the power lies. Also, if you notice the most powerful person in the room, you will also notice what fear is feeding that power. So I'm thinking of, like, when I've been in rooms with heads of organizations and the people that report to them, you can watch the body language and sometimes even the verbal language feed the power to that person and holding their fear in that positionality.
Hmm.
So as I contemplate, particularly as someone who's very interested in leadership, doing it well as recognizing leaders that I want to put my energy behind, I'm noticing the kind of power that they wield and what role fear plays in that power. Are they doing power over? Are they doing power with?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of questions that help me decide where I'm going to put my power.
Right. That's super interesting to me, because as I told you, that this year I'm reading about leadership, and every time I read a new book about leadership, because I run this little company that I love so much, but our team has grown, and my fear has, like, I'm now just afraid of things I didn't even know I should be afraid of or whatever. Think about being afraid of last year, And so it's really interesting to think about, well, what happens with the power? What am I afraid of? How are people talking to me? That is really fascinating. I love your reflection on that. I can't wait to get together and have coffee with you and talk more about that one.
Soon.
Soon. All right. Danny says, hi, Evie. I recently learned about the 90-second rule with regard to dealing with an event that creates an emotional reaction in us. Do you have any practices in your book to respond to these reactions when based in fear? Or perhaps if there's a non-event that promotes a strong fear reaction from our thinking, do you have suggested ways to interrupt those? Right. One thing I just want to say about that question is I love the acknowledgement of both fear that arises sparked by an event and fear that arises sparked by a non-event, but a thought that sometimes in therapy, I can watch somebody's face and I can see the total change in an emotion because of a thought they had that I'm not aware of at all. Nothing happened in the room. So I love the way this question is posed. So do you have suggested ways to interrupt those?
So I do have an exercise in the book directly related to this, but I can say this. You can do nothing to stop or change that 90-second reaction of that biochemical dump. The particular recipe that you dump in that situation, whether it is from your mind or from external experience, is a result of your life and your conditioning. So in that time, in that moment, you can't do anything to change that. If you are noticing that you are having an emotional response that is longer than 90 seconds, that is when you can change it. So a lot of times people will talk about, well, fear keeps us safe from saber-toothed tigers. I'm like, well, not a lot of saber-toothed tigers for one thing. And most modern humans do not have to deal with apex predators being in their face. So that 90 seconds will give you enough to save your life in those moments. And, potentially from other human predators, which are a thing, unfortunately. But in most of our experiences, our fear has to do with our great big brains and really talented imaginations. We're, I think, the only species that can learn from experiences we have not had. So like reading this book, you're going to learn from my experiences that you have not had, but it'll hopefully inform you in, aligning your life with your values. And that space between, when that 90 seconds is over, you're noticing that it's lasting longer, what you want to do with it. That is totally up to you. We have 6 responses to fear, not just 2. And we all do all of them in different situations. And understanding what those others are. So besides our classic fight and flight, which are based on the reactions of male rats, believe it or not, we also we're getting some more traction popularly with freeze response, and fake. And then 2 that don't get nearly enough attention because they really sort of blow up our ideals around fear is care and connect. That in some situations, it is to your benefit, to the benefit of the people you care about, to care for someone else who may also be scared, or to care for that which is scaring you, or to connect with that which is scaring you. So that's related to how I dealt with my fear leading up to today, wanting to do a great job for you guys, is I connected with that fear. I said, this is the story I'm telling myself. Why am I telling this? I can change this. This is now a different story. And in that way, you can move the things that are happening in your mind, again, that have not happened. Gavin de Becker says, the fact that you're afraid of something is proof positive that it hasn't happened. You can move from your initial reaction to a response that is your choice right now, right here.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when you told me those other responses, really blew my mind, because it made me think about my childhood, actually, in ways in which, um, growing up in somewhat of a scary household, there I did a lot of connecting and caring for, and it really helped me manage the fear inside that family. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. My growing up in my chaotic household, freeze worked really well for me
Mm.
because sometimes the crazy would just go by and not notice me.
Yeah. Yeah. If you held your breath long enough.
Yeah.
So just let's see, a response to, let me see. Couple more here. So people are running toward, this is Mark, who says, so many people are running toward happiness. How do you distinguish between running toward or away? Oh, I like that question because it's a running question.
Oh, Mark, you come up with the greatest questions. So running toward happiness, a lot of, again, the research is showing that happiness is not a destination. It's very much a journey. It is a process. It is an experience, but it's not someplace you stay. And I think trying to stay in happiness could probably be as toxic, if not more toxic, than staying in fear. Like anything that becomes stagnant or stuck is not good for us. So as people are experiencing anxiety, which is just anxiety, I feel like the best way to explain it with no medical background, is we have found the fear button and we're just mashing on it, just constantly mashing on the fear button rather than releasing it to be able to actually respond to it. It becomes like the fire bell that never shuts off. You stop hearing it, but your ears are damaged now, but there's no fire. So when people are like, usually people that are like running, trying to find happiness, it's because they're trying to not be afraid. And it's that trying to not be something, that negative thing that just keeps dragging you backwards, right? Because nature abhors a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll pull you back into what you don't want to do. Our subconscious doesn't hear negative. So if I say, I don't want to, date toxic men anymore, your subconscious hears, I want to date toxic men some more. And we're not even necessarily aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So be careful of sort of all or nothing solutions, for one thing. And again, we're changing all the time. And with emotions and happiness, fear, anger, all of them, they're all changing all the time, and they only last for 90 seconds.
Yeah. I get asked a lot because I run long distances. What are you running away from? People think they're hilarious. Like nobody's ever asked it before. Like, what are you running away from? And other people will ask, what are you chasing? And what I always say is those are really irrelevant questions, because when you're out there for 3 hours, you're just with yourself. It changes every step of you might have a series of emotions. You might go through memories. Sometimes I'll cry when I'm out there. It literally is an experience of moment by moment by moment, sort of what you're describing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see. Peter is saying that it's midnight for him in the UK. So he's signing off. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm so glad that you stayed as long as you did.
Congratulations, he's saying. And then maybe this is perhaps another big question, but an interesting one. And then we can let people know how they can get the book if they don't have it already in their hot little hands. So it says EV in VUCA environment, senior organizational leaders are accustomed to predictable environments with certain outcomes. In today's global environment, events are unpredictable, uncertain, and complex. Leaders are fearful to make decisions for fear of failure. What is your recommendation for leading through the unknown? Also, did you integrate mindfulness with neuroscience within an emotional intelligence context for leaders navigating in crisis environment? Those are two really big questions. Let's take the first one. What is your recommendation for leading through the unknown?
Yeah. So anyone who's not familiar with it, VUCA, sometimes pronounces VUCA, is volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. And it describes what some people are perceiving as a novel environment for business and organizations, but it's not. Just people are talking about how not everything is so known now. And as far as leading through that, when you are a person who has been successful with a previous paradigm of doing work, it is really difficult to let go of that without. So I've seen this happen so many times of, well, this is where we get the saying, this is how we've always done it here. That's the voice of, I have been successful in this paradigm and I don't want that to change because I want to continue to be successful. One thing is, if you are that leader, honor your grief, because that world in which you were successful is gone. And understand that what you're doing now is grieving. And please don't take it out on other people. You're the leader. You have to just hold it. Get the support that you need outside your organization. But you really need to understand and grieve that something has died. Something precious to you has died. And that is scary too, because now you don't know what this new thing's going to be. So that's step one. And step two is when you are moving through that grief with support, you can start being okay with experimentation and failing. Like, I have never done this before, being transparent. Like, this is new for all of us, calling people together to network, to be more interdependent than possibly they have been before, and say, we're all in this together. We can figure this out, and we are going to build these sorts of cushions for failure.
What a compassionate answer, and also really in keeping with the tone in the book, which I think is a really compassionate book.
Thank you.
Do you want to take his second question, which is about mindfulness? Did you integrate mindfulness with neuroscience within emotional intelligence context for leaders navigating in crisis management?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
So I've looked at a lot of emotional intelligence research. I am a kind of lax Zen practitioner. So I've practiced mindfulness. I am a big fan of Thich Nhat Hanh, and as well as the neuroscience, bringing all of that to bear on leadership. Leadership is not a big focus in the book. This is more of on the individual level of aligning yourself with your values. And if you are a leader, or you want to put your power and energy towards a leader, this can help you do that more effectively. But as far as bringing these seemingly disparate sort of practices and fields of thought together, that's something that I'm really, really grateful for. My leadership degree education is that it is interdisciplinary. So I will take from any field. If it seems to be relevant to what I'm talking about, I will definitely integrate it. One argument that I do have in the emotional intelligence school of thought is that they're still bifurcating emotions into positive and negative. And I think that is completely false duality. That emotions just are.
Yeah.
It's like saying that, your big toe's a good toe and your little toe is a bad toe. They're just toes. They're all there to do a job.
Right. Right. I suppose we do that. This is my question. I suppose we do that because some emotions feel better. They're more comfortable, and others are more uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we need the discomfort too.
Right. Right. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
What you're saying. That's your point. That's your point around here. Right. Great. All right. Well, so how can people get a hold of this beautiful book if they don't have it already?
Yeah, so it is available on Amazon. I would like to say where all great books are sold, but because of the pandemic, a lot of local bookstores are not taking what they're calling consignment. So I didn't go through a big publisher. So the best way to get it is through Amazon. I also have my own author website now, elisabethvanderweel.com. So you can check there for links to get the book, as well as any of these other events that I may be doing.
Yes, so please get a hold of it and give it to your friends for holiday gifts and all that sort of thing. Good. Oh, well, Evie, what a wonderful conversation. Is there anything that we've forgotten to talk about that you feel like you want to make sure you say?
I think the main thing that I hope that people get from this book and this conversation, at least, is that how you're feeling about anything is not wrong. That is completely appropriate to who you are, where you are right now. And if you want to change that, if it's not working for you anymore, you have the power to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to, but you can.